This is the Golden Door. I'm Kathy Van Ness. This is going to be a fun night. We're going to be talking to Deborah Madison, and I'm going to do a quick introduction. Deborah Madison is an American chef. She's a writer and a cooking teacher. She's been called an expert on plant-based cooking, and her gourmet repertoire showcases fresh garden produce. Her work also highlights slow food, local foods, and farmers market. She is the author of 12 books. Wow, that's a lot. That seems like a lot, including Vegetarian Cooking for Everyone, and most recently, Vegetable Literacy, which we have right here.
Yes.
These books are in our store. Her books have been recipient of 4 James Beard Awards and 2 Julia Child Cookbook of the Year Awards, among others. So in a week, we are trying our cooking school, which you have, I'm sure, a bunch more exciting events to go on. We couldn't have had Deborah Madison on a more fun week. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Kathy. It's wonderful to be here.
I know, we're glad you are. So I think the question always is, for people who just don't like vegetables, I'm sure there's some of us that just don't, what do you do to have them fall in love with them?
Add butter.
We love that. It does help.
It's true. I mean, butter is delicious, or a really good olive oil. I can't believe that people don't like vegetables, but I suppose that's true.
Yes.
But no, I mean, you have to finish them somehow.
Right.
Certainly throwing vegetables in a steaming pan and serving them like that, it's pretty bad. It's okay, but it's not very interesting. But they do need some fat, they need some herbs, they need some good salt.
So it's not so bad to have some butter, right?
No,
right?
It's
That's helpful.
fine to have
Go
butter.
to the Golden Door and we're going to learn about butter. Oh my gosh. Don't tell the chef that. What is your favorite vegetable to cook with? And I'm going to ask you the secondary question. What was your most difficult?
Well, you know, I'm not very good on favorites, because I'm such a seasonal cook. It really depends on what's in season. I mean, I'm not going to say asparagus right now.
Right.
It's winter. I'm looking at winter squash. I'm looking at particular varieties of winter squash that I really love to cook. Marina di Chioggia is the classic squash for pumpkin ravioli, for example. I adore avocados. I always have them in the house.
Well, you know, I think that's an interesting thought. How do we as consumers know? Because we all talk about eating seasonal, which is really the right thing to do. Eat corn at the right time, eat wheat at the right time. But how do we as consumers, when so much is grown at the wrong time, how do we know? How do we really discipline ourselves to only eat it when it's right?
I don't have any problem doing that, because I never eat strawberries out of season because they don't taste good.
Right.
You know, it's really simple. It comes down to that. Same with tomatoes.
Same with tomatoes.
You know, I don't have to have tomatoes all year. I can wait until they come into my farmer's market or into my own garden, and they're really ripe and delicious, and they're a treat. And when they're over, they're over.
And it's not a long period.
No, and this year it was really late, and then it ended early.
So it was over before we started.
It was, so it meant making a lot of tomato sauce. But
you know, we have trademarked 2 tomatoes here at the Golden Door. One is a mountain cherry, and one is a orange one called the Golden Door tomato, and they're both our own cultivated hybrid heirlooms.
Wow, good.
They're quite delicious.
Good for you.
But you would only eat tomatoes in August, September?
Well, I live in northern New Mexico. Ours didn't come until September this year. And then by November, the end of November, they were over.
Yeah.
I mean, except
pretty
for
fast. So what's the vegetable that you just decry?
You know, I love to eat them, but I have a hard time with artichokes, because I'm never really in the mood to deal with artichokes. And I used to be the spokesperson for the California Artichoke Board. No.
Oh my gosh.
When I
love that.
I mean, the UPS man would come and he would drop like 4 gigantic cartons of artichokes on my door. I mean, I don't have a walk-in refrigerator. I have a normal refrigerator. You know? So I did a lot of artichokes. I love artichokes. I've developed recipes for them and so forth. But I don't always look forward to handling them.
Right. They're such...
I know. I'm sorry,
Well,
artichoke growers. but you know, you can always just cut the tops off and steam them. It's a perfectly good way to eat an artichoke, and it makes them kind of a communal food. that way. Many people can dip.
For sure. One of the things you talk a lot about, which I found interesting, was using the whole plant.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that. Does that mean roots, stems, leaves, everything?
Well, I think it depends, but we were just in the garden today, the chef and I, and we'll go there tomorrow and hope you'll have the same experience. But we were eating broccoli leaves, and they're so sweet. And, you know, people just throw them away, or the cores of the cauliflower, or the stalks of the chard. Those are just obvious ones. But
so would you
radish
cook them
greens
separately as a separate one, or would you just mix it in? I mean, obviously
The
the idea you
chard?
could mix it in, but if you want to have stalks, it'd be like, you know.
Well, if you can, there are many dishes, and some of them are in one of my books of just braised chard stems, maybe cut about that long, a whole different vegetable than the leaf. Garden chard can have very thin stems often, in which case I just cut it up and cook it with my chard because it's not going to take very long.
Right.
And the chard needs to be cooked, you
Right,
know, so
to be right.
it's really soft. So
What
there's
about
really
broccoli
time.
stems? They're so.
Oh, broccoli stems are the best.
best,
And
right?
yeah, you have to peel them thickly because that epidermis is very fibrous and chewy. But once you get below that, you have this beautiful stalk which you can cut and you steam it or you cook it. It comes out pale, pale green, lovely.
Wow, that's it.
You know.
How many people have been eating their broccoli stalks when they buy it from them? I see a few.
Yay,
Great
okay,
people,
that's
chefs
great.
in the back. I'd love you. You would. That's sort of interesting, though, right? I'm going to try that. First of all, when you buy broccoli versus growing broccoli, it's a whole.
Oh, it's totally different.
I have to say.
You're going to taste it tomorrow in the garden.
you're
You'll
gonna-
taste something. I mean, the
It's
broccolis
nothing.
are very little bit.
Right.
I mean, broccoli, when it's fresh, should be sweet. It should be delicate. It shouldn't be a hated vegetable. It's lovely.
It's lovely. I have to agree.
Radish greens,
Yum.
when they're young, tender, you can eat them. You know, they're the same shape as arugula, same shape as a lot of the brassicas, so you can learn that in there.
In that.
You know, but they're good. They're a little bit peppery. You know, if they're spiny, you maybe don't want to eat them, or you want to cook them first. But they're food too. And in fact, that's where the nutrition is in the leaves, not the roots.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
How do we know that, though? How do we as consumers know? Like, I guess we should just practice at home and take these vegetables as a whole entity and try all the parts.
Well, you could, and if you get a whole vegetable, you
Yeah,
know,
that's
but
true, too.
but
Buy
often
them
you
cut
don't.
every
I
time.
mean, you know, you come to the store and you see the broccoli crowns. They don't even have the stems,
Right.
you know, let alone the leaves, which are
Right.
quite
They're completely
edible.
gone.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
you know, we kind of treat it like steaks. You know, I mean, it's the best part. It's the most succulent part. It's the most dense and rich part, and we choose that, the crown, the heart, the whatever it is, and ignore the rest. But often the rest is quite edible too. We just don't have to eat it yet, but we will.
Yeah.
I suspect.
I suspect too. You've said often that being labeled a vegetarian is limiting.
Mm-hmm.
And that, especially in the context of today's diverse and ever-changing food culture. So I'm going to actually ask this question different than I thought. Here at the Golden Door, we see paleo and gluten-free and only raw or only vegetables. There are, I mean, our chef could do 40 different meals. What's your perspective on the new world of eating?
Oh.
This is a great, I think this is one of the best questions we could ask.
It is. I have to admit I have a certain intolerance. You know, I think some of it's ridiculous. Paleo isn't really paleo. You know, it's a name for something that's made up. And I even have problems with vegan and problems with vegetarian. Now, not the people who practice those,
Right, of course.
those things, but I mean, I don't know. I don't think we really think things out clearly, and that it's often a response to real problems that are there. But whether those are the answers, adopting this diet or that, I'm not so sure. I mean, I'm really not so sure.
Well, and
I
we don't
know.
practice that here. We practice a fairly diverse menu of just eating properly and eating healthy, even down to having a cookie or some granita.
Yeah.
We don't believe you should definitely hold back from those experiences.
Neither do I.
And our average loss on a week remains consistent all year long. No matter what type of person comes or what kind of diet, the average performance is because you're spending more energy than you're intaking.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Consumers are paying more attention to food and where it's coming from. This is a giant conversation that we have, how it's produced. And again, it's another thing from our guest point of view. How can we know where it comes from?
I really think, I've been a farmer's market champion for years and years and years, even though they're changing and not always for the better. But I think the farmer's market, if you're not a gardener, is probably your best source for finding out what's local and in season, which is the same thing. If it's local, it is in season.
Right.
If it's in season, it's local. In season is where you live. It's not the supermarket, which is the season of the world.
So many cities and urban people don't have farmers markets.
Oh yeah, they do.
You think? How many guys here shop at farmers market? How many of y'all do shop? Everybody does. Okay, well there you go.
That gives you a very good portrait because most farmers markets, have some order. California is a little different, I have to say, because you can be a California farmer and sell at a farmer's market anywhere. Well, it's a big state, right? So you can have strawberries in February up in Davis that are coming from down here.
Right.
Is it local? Well, it's in the state, but are state lines a definition of local? I don't think so.
No, not, exactly.
It's just California, and California is huge.
Well, and there's also the conversation of organic versus just grown properly. Mm-hmm. I mean, many farmers can't afford to be organic.
No, and many farmers who really are organic and exceed the definitions of USDA refuse to certify.
Exactly.
And we have a farmer at our market who's actually quite a well-known writer. And if people say, "Are you organic?" he'll say, "Are you?" But actually, you can visit almost any farmer's farm.
Yeah.
You can see what they're doing. You can see their food. You can kind of judge by them. If somebody doesn't want to certify, I completely understand.
I do too.
But that little saying, "Know your farmer," is very important. And at my market, I know my farmers. I go to certain farmers for certain things, always the same. I don't necessarily try to go to all 100 farmers.
Right, of course not.
I can't, in the summer, but I go to those whose methods I trust and I know.
There's some surprising, you're going to love this one, plant relationships. I had no idea of this, and I bet my guests don't. Like asparagus once belonged to the family of onions.
Yes, Liliaceae.
Did you all know that? That an asparagus was in the onion family. I just find it, first of all, how many more relationships are there like that? I find that quite intriguing.
They're probably.
How did an asparagus start from an onion?
Well, because they are lilies. It didn't start from an onion, but onions and asparagus and lilies were all classified in the family Liliaceae by botanists for a long time. And it has to do with morphology, with the shape of things. And recently, the definitions have been changing because there are other ways of marking plants, plant genetics. And so some botanists have taken asparagus away from the onions and put it in their own family. And onions are over here and lilies are over there. But I kind of liked that they were once related because asparagus is like the queen of spring. It's such an elegant, briefly appearing vegetable. When it comes, if it's local, spring is here in your place. And onions are so stinky and common and everyday, and there are those of us, not everybody, but many of us, can't even imagine starting a dish without an onion. So I can't imagine two more different vegetables than these, and I love that they were once related.
Well, and I have two sort of questions, because part of this is sort of I love the evolution. How do you see, there's a lot of conversation about new species coming up, and as the world is getting warmer and the world is going on, do you see evolving changes yourself as you've studied your vegetables?
Yeah.
Can you share some of them?
Yeah, not so much, I'd like to talk more about fruit. For example, apples, which are in the rose family, need so many chill hours. They need to be in a place where they have so many hours that are cold below a certain degree in order to produce flowers and fruit. And now people are trying to find apples that can bear fruit with fewer chill hours because it's warmer. It's that simple.
And are you aware of the story of the Red Delicious? I'm sure you must.
Which story?
The one that the engineered apple to have the perfect apple.
Oh,
the
yeah,
perfect
it is.
little bumps on the bottom, the perfect stem on the top, the perfect color, but unfortunately.
It's perfectly awful.
It's
you know.
perfectly
But the
awful.
original Red
Yeah,
Delicious
the
was a
original-
fabulous
Exactly,
apple.
but the modified one
Yeah.
is quite scary.
Yeah. Well, that was modified through standard breeding, you know, techniques. And I think in the 40s and the 50s, the extension agents in New Mexico got farmers, we can grow apples generally because we're cold in northern New Mexico, got them to grow Red Delicious. So that's mainly what we find. And they're just not that great an apple. It's too bad.
When you are shopping for these fruits and vegetables, is there a way that, obviously when they say organic, but there's a way that we can know that they're not altered? Like GMO sort of altered, you know, the way that so many things
Well,
have become.
I mean, if you're shopping at the farmer's market,
You're
they
safe.
probably aren't.
Right.
You know, but you can always ask. But what's, to me, more important right now in talking about fruit is fruit should have an aroma. And I've been fascinated for years when you go to a supermarket, people put fruit in the bag and they don't bring it to their nose. And to me, it's just, well, the aroma is telling you something about its promise. Does it have a promise? Is it going to be good? Is it almost ripe? Or is it over the hill? Is it a little fermented? I mean, that's what smell is telling us. And it makes me so sad to see people shop. They're getting they're following the rules about numbers of servings, but they're just putting stuff in bags, and it's not very good.
It's sort of missed the whole
Mostly
point.
not. Yeah.
You know, you and I talked briefly tonight about the spirituality of food, and I understand you're a Buddhist.
I am.
I know, I
Yeah.
love Buddhism. It's a wonderful religion. Can you share is there some crossover from Buddhism to how you feel about your vegetable literacy? Or
I'm not, you know, I practiced Buddhism in a monastery for 20 years, so it's kind of who I am. It's hard to separate from, but I want to give credit to the idea of mindfulness and Buddhism in the kitchen to another author, Dana Velden, who wrote a wonderful book called Finding Yourself in the Kitchen, which just came out this year. And I think she has handled just life and attention in mindfulness. And she's also a Buddhist. Just absolutely beautiful.
Finding Yourself in the Kitchen.
Yeah, it's a good
Have to
title.
read that. It's a great title.
Yeah, and she's a good writer, and it's a wonderful book.
So is your work today less in the kitchen and more out with the guests? Tell me what's going on with your work today.
Well, I'm still writing. I'm writing a lot. I'm writing some more political, social pieces, like for Civil Eats, you know, websites like that. I'm more in the garden, probably than I have been. I'm doing the Master Gardener's course this year, this winter. I'm kind of at a crossroads myself, so you know, I'm trying different things.
I'm glad we get to talk to you at this time. What about are you seeing on the forefront of new ingredients? Are there when you're doing you're working on your stories and your books, are there new ingredients that our guests would love to hear about that you're working with?
Oh my gosh, I honestly feel sort of backwards. You can probably tell me more about new ingredients than I can tell you. I actually learned something very interesting tonight about a new ingredient, which was a powder that Chef Greg showed me, and of dehydrated herbs. And a bunch of other things, and he ground it, and I smelled it. It was just so delicious. And maybe that's something you would do in a cooking class, or you'd, you know, introduce people to. I get hooked on salt. You know.
Really?
Yeah. For a while, I smoked salt. It's very dangerous because you'll put it on everything, and all your food tastes just the same. You know, smoked salt, and then truffle salt, and you know, or herb salts that I've made
Lemon
myself.
Salt, pepper salts.
Yeah, all that stuff. I mean, like I say, it's very addicting. It's so fascinating at first, you know, and then all your food tastes the same.
I know. In your experience as a cook and a gardener, what's the most underutilized or most overlooked vegetable that you talk about in your book, Vegetable Literacy?
Gosh, that's a hard one. I'm just going to say turnips.
There you go. What a perfect one. Those poor turnips.
I'm thinking especially about the Hakurai turnips, the little Japanese sweet turnips, because I've been buying them at my farmer's market, and they're so delicious, and you can just cut them up and eat them raw, and or you can make a lovely little ragu with some coarse mustard in it, and the greens because they're very tender. This is not your usual purple top turnip, which is kind of robust, but related to turnips are rutabagas, and I think they are even more overlooked.
Yes, I would say they're definitely overlooked.
Yeah.
Rutabagas.
Yeah. And we'll see some in the garden.
Oh,
tomorrow.
yes.
But there's such a
How
pretty
many people
color.
are going to do the garden tomorrow? Oh my gosh.
Oh, good.
This is going to be so much fun.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful.
But rutabagas, they have a lovely color, that pale, buttery yellow color, and it doesn't change when you cook it. You have to cook them with some intention and attention as well. Not to undercook them, not to overcook them, because you can't just throw them in the same pot with everything else. They take longer to cook than.
So you're working on a new, or you're working on a new book now?
I am.
And
yes.
Can we get like a hint?
Sure. Actually, 10 Speed asked me if I would put together 100 of my favorite recipes that I've written, but to write more about them, and maybe to give some history.
I think that'd be great.
So, for example, when we did black bean chili at Greens, it occurred to me the only reason we did it with black beans is because they were the most exotic beans we had. Nowadays, we have many, many, many more. We have beautiful Rio Zapes, so I might redo it in a different way.
When do you expect that book to be out?
I'm turning it in May, and so it'll be a year from May. I haven't started it yet.
Oh my God. Well, you're
but
here.
when I go home.
When you'll be ready. You'll be left the golden door and you'll be mentally ready for
That's
it.
right.
Right?
Yeah, right.
So now that you're starting this book, that was actually the lead to my next question.
Yes.
What are your favorite recipes?
My favorite
Do you have
recipes?
favorites? You have so many in your book, which I've looked at your book. It's incredible.
It's really hard because I've written actually a lot of books, and I go through them and I say, I like that recipe. Actually, to tell you the truth, I've been a pastry chef a couple of times, and I love making desserts. and I did write a book called Seasonal Fruit Desserts because fruit can be treated as seasonal just the way vegetables are, and it should be. But aside from desserts, I know that's not what you were asking me about.
Okay.
It's
So
hard
when you
to
go
choose.
home, are you making all these full recipes? Is that you think about your own personal life? You're going into, obviously know it all by heart by this point. There must be some things that just are like your all-time favorite.
Oh, I do have some. Here's a summer recipe, and I know it's winter, but it's. I'm trying to remember how it goes, but it's basically roasted peppers and peeled tomatoes that are then put together in a small casserole and cooked at a very slow temperature. And all these fabulous juices come out, and of course olive oil is in there, and some herbs and some sliced garlic. It's a very, very simple recipe, but it's just
Sounds
so
delicious.
good. I also love baked ricotta cheese. Just beautiful ricotta, the best you can find. Just put in a little, earthenware casserole again. Little thyme leaves on it, crisscross of olive oil, some pepper. Very, very simple, and it's so wonderful, warm for an appetizer, or sometimes for a meal. Sometimes the appetizer is the meal.
So are you traveling much today?
Not too much.
When you do travel and you think about vegetables and countries, is there a story about a particular country and a vegetable that sort of stands out to you? And where is that country?
Well, it would be Italy, because I lived in Rome for a year. And I actually was a cook for the director of the American Academy in Rome. And I loved going to the market because it became a kind of joke almost to ask somebody, oh, you have spinach, you have spinach, what do you do with it? And they'd always say exactly the same thing. And it didn't matter which vendor you went to, there was like one way to cook spinach, there was one way to cook pears, and I thought, oh, it's so interesting because we're not that way. If we say pear, we can think of 25 things to do with a pear.
That's true.
And so I like their sense of being very specific and very centered, and that's what makes a food culture.
I was going to ask you your inspiration of writing books, but I think I already understand that. It's just your love of putting it all together as far as
It's fun to make a book.
Yeah, I'd imagine though it's also
it's
hard.
agony.
You have to test every recipe.
Oh yeah.
But what goes into that? I mean, what's the backstory on writing a cookbook?
Well, one thing is you always have a ruler and a watch and a paper and a pen. And you can't just cook. And so the best thing about finishing a cookbook and turning it in is you can cook whatever you want. You don't have to write anything down. But when you're testing a recipe,
right.
you have to make it so somebody else can do it. So,
exactly.
You're timing everything. And then, and if you forget, you have a dinner party and you think, that's a great way to test recipes. And then people are in your kitchen and they're talking and you're having a glass of wine and you forget to time it and you have to do it all over again.
Is there a certain number of times you have to, you have to write it all down. You have to say in your own mind each recipe I have to try out 1 or 2 times.
3.
3 times.
Yeah, at least 3. And if I can't get it by the 3rd time, I put it aside.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Because I should know. I should know by now.
Can you imagine doing that all day long and perfecting recipes like all day? I think that'd be
I don't do it all day long.
I think it'd be very cool. I mean, I just think it would be. Look how fat this book is. That's like a lot, and she's written 12. That seems like a lot of recipes.
But it's actually works really nicely in combination with writing because part of it's very mental. Yeah. And then, I can go in the kitchen and be physical. And then with this one, I could go in the garden and also have a physical.
Yeah, that's very cool.
So
that's very cool.
I have to do both.
So you have your own cookbooks, but are there other cookbooks out there that are some of your favorite books?
Oh yeah, sure. I love Ottolenghi's books, which probably a lot of you know. They're great. They're fun to cook. They're fun to look at. They're just absolutely beautiful. Camino just came out with their cookbook. It's a restaurant up in Oakland. Everything's cooked over fire. I'm not sure I'm about to do that, but Ottolenghi has been great. The English authors are always fabulous.
Well, I had asked you earlier, did you have a favorite cooking show?
No, because I don't watch. I just don't.
But do you have a favorite chef?
Yeah.
Or a favorite story?
Well, I do, because you had asked me earlier, like in Santa Fe, where do I go? And we don't go to too many places. We don't go to the Texas restaurants, which are very expensive and overblown. But there's a little Spanish tapas restaurant called La Boca, and the chef is James Campbell Caruso. And I love his food. I love eating there. He has a great wine list, little tapas, big tapas. It's perfectly cooked. It's a convivial place to be.
Do you find, as being a chef yourself, I often ask Greg this, when you go to restaurants, and I've been to a couple with him, so I think I know his answer sometimes, that you can sort of look at it, do you enjoy it? Or do you sort of think, I wish they would have done it differently?
You know,
Is it hard? Are you the worst critic for another chef?
No, because I don't go out to eat that much. To tell you the truth, I live in the country. It's a long drive into town. At the end of the day, we don't necessarily want to do it. I mean, my life is a little bit different than it used to be.
How big is your garden?
It's about, a 1/4 of an acre or so. Yeah.
That's a big garden.
Well, that's just the vegetable garden. So then I have a beautiful garden inside.
Just the vegetables. And are you working that garden yourself?
I am. It's really hard. It's a lot for one person.
So we always do something really special here that we love, and every time we sort of close, and we know everybody's ready for their 5:30 hikes, right? And we always close with, if you could leave our guests with the perfect golden nugget. And we just love having you here, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so glad you came to spend this week with our guest. What would be the golden nugget that you could leave them, that they could take and remember forever?
I could leave you a gold mine.
But we like that. We like gold mines.
But actually, it was interesting tonight. The chai tea in the other room, people were exclaiming, over how delicious it was. And it wasn't at all like putting a tea bag in hot water, and it wasn't. It was so much better. So, and people were really actively talking about that. And I thought the nugget I would leave is make something from scratch. Try something real.
Like
Don't just go to Trader Joe's and get a tea bag. Sometime make chai. You don't have to grow the spices or anything, but once in a while, try making your own hummus, your own whatever. It's easy. A lot of these things are so easy to do, and the difference is so big, isn't it?